I need you to hear this. I don't know who needs to hear this, but you cannot grow comfortable in your misery. Some of you have grown comfortable with your misery. You have allowed the misery in your life to take up permanent residence in your life, and you think it's always going to be there. It is amazing how we human beings can grow comfortable with something. You can have a pain today that is absolutely just so bad. It's horrific. It's just horrible. And the longer that you have that pain, the more used to you get to that pain. It's amazing. We'll settle in it. You cannot settle in your insecurity. You cannot take up permanent residence in your fear. You cannot take up permanent residence in a pause that was brought about because of some horrific situation in your life. So sometimes, let me say this, sometimes exiting the pause can be uncomfortable. Can I read you something? Verse 7, put verse 7 up. Verse 7. Keep the brook sounding great. Everybody say it sounds great. Sometime later, just hold with me, guys. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Verse 8, then the word of the Lord came to him. Now pause. If I were writing this part of the text, me personally, I would have some additional stuff in between verse 7 and verse 8. There would be like verse 7b. Where, go back to verse 7. Verse 7 says what? Verse 7 says, sometime later the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. I'd be like, what? I don't understand this, God. I came here, you told me to come here, the brook was beautiful, and now the brook has dried up. I don't understand this, God. I'm doing everything that you want me to do. I don't get it, God. I can't figure this thing out, God. You told me to come to this place called Cherith, and here we are. And for me, I just feel like there's something that's missing. Because I do not believe that the stream stopped immediately. I don't believe that. Because had that happened, Steve, I believe that it would have been a really good sign for him to take off running immediately if the water had stopped immediately. But the water didn't stop immediately. I don't believe the ravens stopped immediately. I think what happened is the water became less and less. The flow, the sound became less and less and less over time until it was gone. And the ravens stopped bringing food. It didn't just stop like that. I think what happened is one day breakfast was supposed to be there at 9 a.m. and it showed up at 10:30. Dinner was supposed to be there at 6 p.m. and it showed up at 8:45. I think another day, instead of him bringing a pound of food, he brought a half a pound of food. And maybe another day, the stream got narrower and narrower. And pretty soon, he was kind of in a place of pause, like he'd been lulled to sleep, so to speak. Kind of like the enemy does. When you get in a pause, it's like he lulls you to sleep, Henry. You know what I'm saying? It's just like you've been here for so long, you don't realize that now it's taken up this permanent residence in you. But I need somebody to hear this. You cannot die in your pause. Had he stayed where he was, now I'm not going to try to get ahead of myself, but if he stays right where he's at, he's going to die. There's no sustenance anymore. Yeah, it's been comfortable for him, but there's no water anymore. He can't continue to stay where he's at, because if he continues to try to stay in his comfort, he's going to die. But look, let me just go back to verse 8. Go back to verse 8. Let me find verse 8. Hold on a second. All right, go back to verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Now hold on a second. Because I think there has to be, again, in my mind, there has to be this thing in between verse 7 and verse 8. It's like, and the brook dried up, then the word of the Lord came to him. I think the brook was drying up, and then the word of the Lord came to him. But why did the word of the Lord come to him? This is why I believe there was something else there that we're not seeing, because I believe that he cried out. I think there was a moment, Hank, where he cried out to the Lord. I think there was a moment where he was like, God, I need you. I don't understand this, God, as it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Listen, can I tell you this? Just because you're crying out to God does not mean your brook will not run dry. Whew. Just because you're crying out to God doesn't mean that you will not have a difficulty in your life like a raven stopping from bringing you any food. Just because you cry out doesn't mean that your crazy situation still won't make you feel crazy. Just because you cry out doesn't mean that it's going to be any easier in this moment to get through the situation that you're in, because in this moment you don't want to just cry out. You want to punch somebody because the way they treated you. You want to tell them off, and just because listen, and when you tell them off, you wish you'd have told them even more. You wanted to give them a piece of your mind, and sometimes you give them way too much of your mind. You'll get that later. But just because, listen, and people don't even know what you're going through. I need somebody to hear this. People don't even know what you're going through and what you're going through on the inside because you're unwilling to share it with anybody, because it's not because you're too prideful, but it's because you're not really sure who to share it with or how to get through it or how to get around it or how to get over it. And nobody knows how you feel, and you've been suffering. Even though you're 2 years sober, it's been a battle for you, and people don't even know it. But can I tell you something? When you cry out, it doesn't mean that in that moment something's going to change. But what it does mean is that he's heard your cry. When the brook begins to dry up, he heard you. When you're insecure, he heard you. When you can't figure things out and you cry out, he heard you. When you're sick in your body and you need help, he heard you. When your job is driving you crazy, he heard you. When people are driving you crazy, he heard you. When the brook is drying up, he heard you. When the raven stops